There are many people that hold that Jesus never existed. These are called mythicists, and they believe that Jesus was a composite character. And what that means is that at some point, people took a whole bunch of personalities and conflated them together and produced a Jesus, and then that conflated character would evolve and actually was no such person at all. There are two versions of this. Version A is there was just the whole thing is absolutely a myth. It's Casper the Friendly Ghost, just no such person, nothing like that. The more popular expression of mythicism is that, okay, there was some guy in the Galilee, who's just a Jewish guy, and maybe a few people he was studying with, and then all this stuff is completely created, but it had nothing at all to do with him. That's basically what the argument is. There is a good reason, there is good reason for believing these things. I don't necessarily say they are true, but first let me explain the problem for us as historians. When we look at history, it is not like the hard sciences where we could, if someone makes a claim, we can then replicate it in a laboratory. We can do it again. And that's necessary in any of the hard sciences. You've got to be able to replicate the claim. Right? The problem is we can't do history over again. So therefore, we can't do it again. We've just got to look at a very small amount of literature from the ancient world and just try to figure out what happened. We can never be sure of anything, but what we're doing is we're asking ourselves from 1 to 10, what is the likelihood that this is true or not true? What the reason why people believe that Christianity is based on something out of completely whole cloth is because there is not a single contemporaneous author who wrote one word about him. I mean, let alone Matthew's passion narrative that says when Jesus was crucified, people came out of their graves and started walking around Jerusalem introducing themselves to people. I mean, don't you think the newspapers might have mentioned that? I mean, that should have somebody, I mean, are we really to believe that no one, I mean, Philo and, I mean, no one, so we don't have any contemporaneous text, zero of Jesus or anything like that. And it is portrayed in the New Testament. Jesus was a fairly popular figure. In fact, in his what's called triumphal entry into Jerusalem, thousands of people there. That would have been recorded in the ancient world, and it's not. No one records it. In fact, we have one text which is called TF, which is Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews. The year is 94, book number 1855. But that we all know is an interpolation, meaning that's completely was invented. Almost certainly by Eusebius in the 324, because no one else mentions that. So that's invented. So we have nothing. We have nothing from the first century. The first non-Christian to ever mention Jesus, ever, is would be Pliny the Younger in the year 112, who not even mentioning Jesus. He's just saying that these Christians are gathering for their services, and they don't have a license to do that, which you needed in the Roman Empire to gather. And then our second non-Christian to mention Christianity, again, it's not really related to Jesus or anything like that, and that would be Tacitus in the year 114. Okay, so this is the reason why people question. One of the things you should bear in mind is that all New Testament scholars in any university, whether they are devout Christians or they are agnostic and don't believe in God at all, with very strong force reject this completely. And they'll get really angry if you say this. You could take a New Testament scholar teaching at a liberal university And if he hears that, he'll say, you don't know what you're talking about. Jesus really did exist, even though I don't believe in God. And people wonder, well, why is it that all New Testament scholars, even if they're completely agnostic, some of them are very well-known people who've written a lot of books, why are they so forceful about this? And why is there such a consensus among scholars, New Testament scholars, that he absolutely was a historical figure, and we're trying to figure out how to get to the historical Jesus, this quest for the historical Jesus. And what people miss is that these people cannot be taken seriously, not because they're bad people, but if you tell a New Testament scholar that Jesus never existed, what you are saying to them, that means they're very biased. They're not bad people, but you are saying that you've devoted your entire life to studying Bugs Bunny. It means your life has been a waste. So therefore, when it said, well, how come no New Testament scholars, even those who are not Christians, don't believe in this? Well, the reason is because you're now saying that their life has been studying, Casper the Friendly Ghost. So therefore, don't be swayed by the absolute consensus among New Testament scholars that Jesus did exist. They have everything at stake because their life has absolutely been meaningless because they've been studying about something else. Do you all understand what I just said? Because people often go, well, this guy's agnostic. He's written 30 books about Jesus. He doesn't believe in God, but he'll go crazy if you tell him Jesus never existed. There's a reason why. These people are not bad people. This professor at Harvard, she's not an idiot. But the thing is, you are saying to them, your life is meaningless. So they are really the worst people to ask if Jesus existed because of this bias. Okay? So do you understand that point? I've never heard anyone say this. People seem to be impressed by the consensus of New Testament scholars, but imagine being a New Testament scholar and saying that he never existed. What are you doing? Like studying you're studying the texts about the Roadrunner, about Bugs Bunny? I mean, you're saying your life is about nothing. Okay, to get that point? Now you're asking me what really do I think happened. So this is something I try to stay away from because it's speculative. It's highly speculative. And I don't generally engage in speculation because when people ask me questions, they are going to decide if they're going to worship the God of Israel or not. And really, I hope to convey to you that it does not make a difference what I believe. It is not important. I don't care if you like me or you don't. What I believe is of no importance. It's what I can prove to you. And it's what the Bible says. That's very important. It's not about, Tovia, he, this and that. It's what I believe is completely irrelevant. It's what I can prove to you from the Bible. Do you get that? It's very important. Okay. So I happen to be of the belief that if we take, it's all about likelihood. What is the likelihood there was somebody who this religion was created around, and we can say 1 being absolutely no such person and 10 being definite. No one could say one or the other. It's just what is the likelihood given the dearth of material that we have? What is the likelihood there was such a person? So I think the likelihood that there was a person who never claimed to be the Messiah, and that's why you're going to have the Matthew 16 and all these doubting passages, is, I think, somewhere around 6 or 7. I think it's more likely there was such a person that was not. It may even be in the 8 area of what I think. Because all you can do is say the likelihood is. The reason why I feel that it's likely that there was an itinerant preacher who was one of thousands of people in the first century running around saying that the kingdom of heaven is coming, God's kingdom is coming to earth, and all Rome is going to be destroyed, I think is high because this is going to sound really crazy. Okay, you ready? But there are many reasons why I think it's likely that there was a person like that, and then all this stuff is developed later. And that is, this is very counterintuitive, but what I find very convincing is the fiction in the New Testament that's, I think, very convincing because much of the fiction in the Christian Bible would have not been necessary if no one like that ever existed. strangely, it is the fiction that tells me there likely was a person. I give you 100 examples of this. I mean, so much of this would not be necessary. I'll offer one that's really easy to get, okay? And this is why I think the number is 7 or 8. And that is that the author of Mark, whoever wrote it, was an adoptionist, meaning simply that Jesus was, there's nothing unusual about Jesus' birth. What city he's born, he's not mentioned. We're introduced to Jesus as an adult in the book of Mark at his baptism. Okay, so that's pretty early. But what develops very quickly is the idea that Jesus had to be born in Bethlehem. This becomes really important, and it's only important to 2 New Testament writers, and only 2 New Testament writers will make the claim that Jesus was born to a virgin named Mary in Bethlehem. What is very striking about these only 2 infancy narratives we find in the New Testament, one in Matthew and one in Luke. Luke is far more elaborate, is they each use a different, in literature it's called a plot device to make that happen, which means they need to get Jesus, who is from Nazareth, which no one ever heard of, which makes it very convincing, because why choose Nazareth when Nazareth is not mentioned in Talmud, Tanakh, nowhere. And then they're trying to get him to be a resident of Nazareth, and therefore he's always known as Jesus of Nazareth, not of Bethlehem. That's the ascription that's assigned to him. But how do we get him to be born in Bethlehem? Because King David was born in Bethlehem. So Matthew and Luke independently, they couldn't get on the phone or email each other and say, well, what did you do? Oh, you did that? Okay, let me know. No, that's not going on. In the first, so what happened is they each independently come up with a different plot device, and they're complete opposites. Which means if I asked you, in simple terms, let me just explain this. If I asked you, according to these books, what was the original hometown of Joseph and Mary? Where do they come from? What city are they from? What is the answer? What's that? I'm sorry?
I think it says the city of David.
Okay, so you're saying that the original hometown of this couple, we'll call them young, just this couple, is Bethlehem. That's where they originally came from.
I think that's what it says.
Okay. That's unusual. Most people wouldn't say it. Most people would say, where was the couple originally from? Nazareth. That's because but you would both be correct, because it actually depends. According to Luke, the couple starts out in Nazareth. And then at the time when Quirinus, who was the governor of Syria, following Herod's removal in the 6th CE, it's Herod the Great's son. So what happens is there's a census where the whole empire is for taxation purposes. There's no record of this in history anywhere. Everybody in the empire has to go back to the ancestral city from where their ancestors lived 1,000 years ago. And imagine if we said to you, you have to go back to where your ancestors lived 1,000 years ago. Where would you go? But somehow everybody, why would this be necessary? As it turned out, of course, there were census takers like we have today, but people did not move for a census. Census takers moved, okay? But Luke wants to come up with a reason how to get the family to go from their hometown of Nazareth, why they have to get to Bethlehem. And they come to Bethlehem, and of course, Mary's going to have a baby, and she'd like to, I guess, stay at the Holiday Inn, the Howard Johnson, or weren't a rich family, but there was no room at the inn, and Jesus is ultimately born in a barn, literally is in a manger, and then what happens subsequent to that? It's by the way, Luke's infancy narrative is enormous, and I'm leaving out a lot of it. This is the part that's critical, is that after some shepherds come and visit and so on, the family then goes to Jerusalem, where the appropriate offerings are brought. a month later, and then go to Nazareth, and that's where Jesus is raised. Okay, so the family starts out in Nazareth. They go down to Bethlehem where Jesus is born, and then they return back home to Nazareth. In Matthew, it's exactly the reverse. In Matthew, the family is from Bethlehem. There's no barn and manger in Matthew because, frankly, if you lived in Bethlehem, would you go to a hotel down the block? Of course not. So he's born at home. And what happens then is, but we need to get him, Matthew has to get him to Nazareth because everyone knows he's from Nazareth. Get it? So therefore what he does is he has the slaughter of the innocents where Herod the Great, which means Matthew is placing Jesus' birth about 10 years before Luke. Okay? He has to escape and get away from Herod the Great. He's going to kill every child born in Bethlehem. So they then go down to Egypt, chapter 2, verse 13 through 15 in Matthew, and they are there until the death of Herod. Matthew famously says, to fulfill what was said, out of Egypt have I called my son, even though the text in Hosea 11:1 is referring to Israel, not referring to the Messiah. And now what happens then is Joseph is then told by an angel that he actually can't go back home. I mean, the natural thing is now Herod the Great is dead. Great, let's go back to Bethlehem. You can't. Why? Because as it turns out, Herod's death brings about Herod's son, who was a psycho. He was absolutely out of his mind. And so the angel says to him, you can't go back home. That's not safe. Home, by the way, is Judea. Bethlehem is in Judea. You've got to go down to Nazareth because you don't want to be dealing with Herod Jr. He's out of his mind. So it's two opposite events. Herod the Great dies in 4 BCE, so therefore Matthew has Jesus born in the year about 6 BCE. Always found that interesting because that would mean that according to Matthew, Jesus was born 6 years before Christ, but that's a whole different issue. Now, why is this all necessary? Why would it be necessary? There's an example. If Jesus was Casper the Friendly Ghost, means nothing ever existed. Why would they come up with Nazareth? Who ever heard of Nazareth? And you even find that in John, in the early John, like what good thing can come out of Nazareth? So like Nazareth is nothing, And so therefore, why don't you just, if you're making it up that he's just born in Bethlehem, he's always in Bethlehem, and period. You don't need the Nazareth part. So now I give you 100 examples of this kind of, so strangely, it is the fiction that indicates to me that this is a real person who really was from Nazareth, never saw Bethlehem, was in Nazareth, and then the writers have to come up with devices to get him to be born in Bethlehem. And they actually come up with two very convoluted, they independently work, but they contradict each other. I have a whole chapter in volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical where I explore this. That kind of fiction would have not been necessary if Jesus never existed. It also makes sense that, because at the time, as it turns out, there were thousands of people who were running around saying, who were what we would call today proclaiming an apocalyptic eschatology. That means God's imminent kingdom would be coming to earth, and the world would not come to an end, but the empire would come to an end, and God's reign on earth would come about. And not only that, it's happening soon. It's happening imminently. That's why we find in the Gospels, only in the Synoptic Gospels, that this generation will not pass before this happens. Many of you sitting here will not taste of death until it happens. So the thinking then was, it's happening. Okay, apocalyptic is a Greek word. It just apocalypse. It just means revelation. That's all it means. In fact, that's the first word of the book of Revelation. It's apocalypse. So the idea was, and that's exactly what would have gotten you crucified. If you had done anything else, robbed a bank, killed somebody, they would not crucify you. Crucifying was reserved to make an example out of you because you sought to overthrow the empire. So therefore, on a scale of 1 to 10, this and 100 other examples I can give you, which are completely vestigial, just unnecessary, would point to that there was somebody who just got on, who said the kingdom of heaven is coming to earth, the empire is going to be overthrown, and that would explain exactly what would get you crucified. That's what got you crucified, was treason. Anything wasn't treason, the Romans weren't interested. But they wanted, crucifixion meant you were on the cross and you were there for a week. And you died. It took a long time to die on the cross. In fact, what is very striking is not Jesus rising from the dead. There's so much literature about people in the ancient world rising from the dead. What is very odd is nobody died in 6 hours. So that, I think, is very impressive. It's very impressive that he could die that fast. But in the ancient world, people would languish on the cross for 4 to 7 days, standing there absolutely naked, defecating on themselves. Was absolute humiliation, and they finally died. They were not buried. Their bodies were then eaten by scavengers, so they were even deprived of any kind of burial, and then eventually whatever remains was thrown into a common grave. That's the purpose of it. So the purpose is you were walking, this is described vividly. I mean, you were walking to Jerusalem and you saw people just on crosses all over the place. It sent a message: do not mess with the empire. Okay? So that's why I think I put it in the 7 and 8 area. Okay? That's what I find very compelling. And it makes more sense than just, there's no reason to invent it when there were in fact so many people who were crucified for exactly that.